I was standing in my bedroom doorway at 3 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, 3 hours earlier than I should have been home, watching my husband and his sister pack my jewelry into a canvas tote bag like they were clearing out a storage unit. My grandmother's pearls were in his hand. My mother's gold bracelet was already in the bag. The diamond studs I bought myself when I got my first promotion were sitting on the bed between them. They both froze when they saw me. He didn't even try to explain at first. Just stood there holding my jewelry box like I'd caught him doing something as mundane as folding laundry. His sister's face went blank, and I felt my entire body go cold in the summer heat, even though the fan was spinning above us, even though I was still wearing my forest green dress from work, the one I wore when I still thought I was building something real. The silence stretched between us like a canyon. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, that rapid drumming that happens when your body knows something is catastrophically wrong before your mind catches up. My husband's hand was still suspended in midair, my grandmother's pearls dangling from his fingers like he'd been caught reaching into a cookie jar. Except this wasn't a cookie jar. This was my inheritance, my history, the physical remnants of women who'd loved me before I even existed. His sister recovered first. She always did. She had this way of reshaping reality with her voice, of making the impossible sound reasonable. "Oh, you're home early," she said, as if that was the problem. As if my unexpected arrival was the crisis here, not the fact that they were literally stealing from me in my own bedroom. She set down a velvet ring box, my engagement ring box ironically, which she'd been emptying of the cocktail rings I'd collected over the years. Small treasures. Nothing expensive. But mine? That moment didn't make sense yet. It would. But standing there, I didn't understand what I was seeing. I didn't understand that I'd just walked into the middle of my own demolition. Let me go back. Let me tell you how I got here. 3 weeks earlier, I was cleaning out the refrigerator late at night when I couldn't sleep. That's when I first started to feel that something was wrong. It was summer in Brooklyn, in my 2-story row house with a narrow backyard and clothesline, in this gentrifying area where old buildings meet new condos, and you can't tell anymore what belongs and what's just pretending. The heat makes everything slow down. The fan spins all day and barely cuts through the thick air. I stood in the kitchen at 1 in the morning, pouring sweet tea from the plastic pitcher in the refrigerator, and I felt it. This low hum of dread I couldn't name. The kitchen linoleum was cool under my bare feet, one of the few surfaces in the house that stayed cold even in the thick August heat. I'd mopped it that morning before work, using the same pine-scented cleaner my mother had used when I was a child. Funny how you carry these small rituals forward, thinking they'll protect you somehow. Thinking that if you clean the floors and tend the garden and save your buttons, you're building something permanent. I'm 31 years old. I should have been asleep next to my husband. But I wasn't. I was standing there in bare feet on the linoleum, holding a glass of tea, staring at the framed picture of Jesus in the hallway like it might tell me what was wrong. It didn't. It just hung there the way it always did. Watching. Silent. That picture had been my grandmother's. She'd given it to me when I got married, told me to keep him watching over my home. Keep him at the center, she'd said. I'd hung it in the hallway that very week, positioning it so it was the first thing you saw when you walked in the front door. Now I wondered if he'd seen everything, if he'd watched it all happen and said nothing. I'd been spending my mornings tending tomatoes and collard greens in the small garden out back, dirt under my nails, trying to grow something that belonged to me. The tomatoes were doing well that summer, fat and red and heavy on the vine. I'd wake up at dawn before the heat became unbearable and water them with the green plastic watering can I'd found at a garage sale. I'd check each plant, pinch off the suckers, tie up the stems that were getting too heavy. It was meditative work. It made me feel useful, like I was nurturing something into existence. On the shelf above the sink sat a coffee can full of saved buttons, little pieces I'd collected from clothes too worn to keep but too precious to completely throw away. I used to think that meant something, that saving small things meant I was careful, that I was building a life. Blue buttons from my father's work shirt, pearl buttons from a blouse my mother wore to church, a red button from my first interview suit, each one a small monument to something that had mattered. But standing there that night, I felt the edges of something I couldn't see yet. Something wrong in the shape of my own house, in the way my husband had been looking at me, In the way his sister had started coming over more often, staying later, whispering in corners. They'd always been close. Too close, my mother had said once, then never mentioned it again. I'd brushed it off. Told myself I was being paranoid, that it was good he had family, that I should be grateful he wanted to include his sister in our lives. I should have known sooner. The signs were there. I just didn't want to see them. The next morning, I went to the bank to deposit a check. It was my paycheck from the nonprofit where I worked as a program coordinator, helping formerly incarcerated women find housing and employment. The work was hard and the pay wasn't great, but it mattered. I believed in it. I believed in giving people second chances, in the power of redemption and rebuilding. Maybe that's why I was so blind to what was happening in my own life. I was so focused on helping other women escape their circumstances that I didn't notice I was becoming trapped in my own. The bank was one of those older buildings in downtown Brooklyn, the kind with marble floors and high ceilings that made every sound echo. The teller frowned at her screen. She called her supervisor. The supervisor asked me to wait. I stood there at the counter, my check still in my hand, watching other customers come and go. A man in a suit deposited a stack of bills. A young mother with a baby on her hip withdrew cash. An elderly woman asked about her pension payment. Normal people doing normal things. I was supposed to be normal too. They came back 20 minutes later and told me my account was overdrawn. I told them that wasn't possible. I checked it 2 days ago. There was money there. The supervisor, a woman in her 40s with tired eyes and a name tag that said Eleanor, turned her monitor toward me and showed me the withdrawals. Large ones, recent ones. $500 at an ATM in Manhattan. $700 transferred to an account I didn't recognize. $300 at a jewelry store in Queens. Another $400 at a furniture store. I didn't recognize half of them. I felt my stomach drop. That physical sensation of falling even though you're standing still. My hands started to shake. I set the check down on the counter because I was afraid I'd drop it. "Do you recognize these transactions?" Eleanor asked. Her voice was gentle but firm, the voice of someone who'd had this conversation before. "No," I said. My voice sounded far away, like it was coming from someone else's mouth. "I didn't make any of these." She asked me if I'd authorized the transactions. I said no. She asked me who else had access to my account. I said my husband. She nodded slowly, like that explained everything. Like this was a story she'd heard a dozen times before. Like I was just another woman standing at her counter, looking at proof that the person sleeping next to her every night had been stealing from her in broad daylight. "I'm going to print this for you," Eleanor said, "and I'm going to give you some information about filing a fraud report. But I need to be honest with you. If your husband has access to your account, and you gave him that access voluntarily, the bank may not be able to do much. This becomes a domestic matter, not a banking matter." A domestic matter. Such a clean phrase for something so devastating. I left the bank with a printed statement in my hand and a feeling in my chest like I'd swallowed glass. The sun was bright outside, painfully bright. People walked past me on the sidewalk, going about their days, checking their phones, talking, laughing. The world was continuing as if nothing had happened, as if my life hadn't just cracked open right there at the counter of a bank on a Tuesday morning. When I got home, I asked him about it. He was in the living room, scrolling on his phone, sitting in the armchair we'd bought together at a flea market in Williamsburg. It was a good chair, sturdy oak with worn leather cushions. I'd loved it when we found it. Thought it looked distinguished. Now it just looked like a throne he'd claimed in my house. I put the statement on the coffee table in front of him. The coffee table was covered with his things, his magazines, his empty coffee cup from that morning, his sister's sweater draped over the arm of the couch. She'd left it there 3 days ago, and nobody had moved it. It was like she lived here now. Like this was her house, too. He glanced at the statement, barely looked at it, just a quick flick of his eyes across the numbers, then back to his phone. "Yeah, I needed to cover some things," he said. Not sorry, not embarrassed, just matter of fact, like he was telling me he'd bought milk. "What things?" I asked. I was still standing. I realized I hadn't moved since walking into the room. I was frozen there, holding my purse, still wearing my work clothes. Just things. Bills. Stuff I needed. He still wasn't looking at me. His thumbs moved across his phone screen. He was texting someone. "That's $700. I said. "You took $700 without asking me." "It's not taking if it's our money," he said. And finally, he looked up. Finally, he met my eyes. And there was something in his face that I'd never seen before. Not guilt, not shame, something harder. Something that said I was being unreasonable for even asking. "It's my account," I said. "My paycheck. And I'm your husband," he said. "What's yours is mine, right? Isn't that what marriage means?" His sister was there. She was in the kitchen, but I could see her through the doorway. She was making herself a sandwich, moving through my kitchen like she owned it, opening my refrigerator, using my bread, my mustard, my plates. She looked at me like I was being unreasonable, like I was the problem. When she caught me looking, she rolled her eyes. Actually rolled her eyes at me, in my own house. "You need to pay it back," I said. My voice was shaking now. "All of it, today." "I will," he said. "Relax. You're overreacting. I'll pay it back when I get paid." "When is that?" "I don't know. Soon. Why are you making such a big deal about this?" And here's the thing that kills me now. I believed him. I believed him because I'd been taught my whole life that forgiveness was the answer, that blood and family must always be forgiven. That's what my mother told me. That's what the women in my family had always done. My grandmother stayed with my grandfather even after she found out about his other family in North Carolina. My mother stayed with my father through the drinking, through the nights he didn't come home, through the screaming matches that made me hide in my closet with my hands over my ears. You don't turn your back on your husband. You don't question your family. You forgive. You move on. You keep the peace. So when he looked at me with those soft eyes and said he'd made a mistake, when his sister told me I was making a big deal out of nothing, I swallowed it. I went upstairs. I changed out of my work clothes. I made dinner. I set 3 plates at the table because his sister was staying for dinner now, apparently. That was happening now, and I acted like everything was fine because that's what I'd been taught to do. That's what good women did. They kept the peace. They made it work. They sacrificed themselves on the altar of family harmony. But it wasn't a mistake. It was a pattern. Over the next 2 weeks, I started noticing things. Mail I didn't recognize. Envelopes with my name on them from companies I'd never heard of. I started checking the mail before my husband got home from work, hiding the pieces that looked suspicious in my purse, bringing them inside when he wasn't looking. I felt like a spy in my own house. It was a strange feeling, that combination of fear and determination. Part of me didn't want to know. Part of me was desperate to know everything. I opened one envelope while sitting in my car in the driveway. It was a credit card statement for a card I'd never applied for. The balance was almost maxed out, $8,000. The purchases were recent, electronics, furniture, cash advances. I didn't recognize any of it. But there at the top of the statement was my name, my address, my social security number. I felt my hands start to shake. I opened another envelope, a loan payment notice, for furniture I'd never seen. $12,000 borrowed from a rent-to-own place in Queens. Monthly payment $400. First payment overdue. I sat in my car for 40 minutes that evening, reading through statements, my hands trembling so badly I could barely hold the papers. When I finally went inside, my husband asked why I'd been sitting in the car. I told him I'd been on a phone call with a friend. He accepted that, went back to watching TV. His sister was there, of course. She was always there now. I started keeping the mail, hiding it in a drawer in the kitchen, under the dish towels where I knew he'd never look. I didn't tell him. I didn't tell anyone. I just collected it like evidence, even though I didn't know yet what I was building a case for. Every day I'd check the mailbox. Every day there was something new. Another statement, another notice, another piece of proof that my life was being stolen out from under me. At night, I couldn't sleep. I'd lie there next to him, listening to him breathe, wondering who he was, wondering if I'd ever really known him. The fan spun above us. The heat pressed down. And I felt myself disappearing. That's the only way I can describe it. Like I was becoming less solid, less real. Like I was fading into the background of my own life. You're probably screaming at me right now. You're probably thinking, how did you not see it? How did you let it get this far? I ask myself the same thing. Every single day. But when you're inside it, when you're the one living it, it doesn't feel like a choice. It feels like drowning in slow motion. It feels like the water rising so gradually that you don't realize you can't breathe until you're already under. You keep thinking you're standing on solid ground. You keep thinking that if you just hold on a little longer, if you just try a little harder, everything will make sense again. I gave up everything for him. That's what I'm trying to tell you. I sacrificed boundaries. I forgave endlessly. Never said no. Every time he needed money, I gave it. Every time his sister asked me to co-sign something, I signed. Every time his family needed a favor, a loan, a place to stay, I said yes. His cousin stayed with us for 3 months last year. Slept on our couch, ate our food, never paid a dime. His brother borrowed my car and brought it back with an empty tank and a crack in the windshield. I didn't complain. His mother asked me to co-sign a lease for her, and I did it, even though something in my gut told me not to. I stopped asking questions. I stopped checking the bank account. I stopped protecting myself because I thought protecting them was the same thing. I thought being a good wife meant being selfless. I thought being a good woman meant making everyone else comfortable, even if it meant making myself small, even if it meant disappearing entirely. I gave and gave until I had nothing left but that coffee can of buttons and a garden full of vegetables I grew myself. One morning, I got an email, a notification from a credit monitoring service I didn't remember signing up for. It said there had been activity on my credit report. A new account opened. I was at work when I got it, sitting at my desk in the cramped office I shared with 2 other coordinators. I clicked the link. It took me to a login page. I tried my usual password. It didn't work. I tried another. It didn't work. I requested a password reset. When the reset email came through, I sat there staring at it for 5 minutes before clicking it. I knew that once I opened that door, once I saw what was on the other side, everything would change. I wouldn't be able to unknow it. I wouldn't be able to pretend anymore. I clicked it. When I finally got in, I saw it. An entire credit history I didn't recognize. Accounts I'd never opened, loans I'd never taken. My name, my social security number, my signature on everything. Except it wasn't my signature. It was close. Close enough that I could see how someone might mistake it for mine. But it wasn't mine. The loops were wrong. The slant was different. Someone had practiced writing my name until they could forge it well enough to fool a bank. I felt sick. Actually, physically sick. I ran to the bathroom and threw up. Then I sat on the floor of the bathroom stall, my forehead pressed against the cool metal door, trying to breathe, trying to understand what I was seeing, trying to reconcile the man I'd married, the man who'd held my hand at our wedding and promised to love and cherish me, with the man who'd been systematically erasing me. I printed it all. Page after page. I made a folder, then another, then a whole drawer full of evidence that my life had been forged around me. I took sick leave from work that afternoon, told my supervisor I had food poisoning. She didn't question it. I probably looked like death. When I finally worked up the courage to take it to the bank, the woman behind the counter went pale. She was younger than me, maybe 25, with neat braids and a name tag that said Jasmine. She looked at the papers I'd spread across her desk and said, "Ma'am, you need to speak to a manager." The manager was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and silver hair pulled back in a bun. Her name was Carol. She sat down across from me in a small glass-walled office where everyone walking past could see us, but nobody could hear. She went through every page. She asked me questions I couldn't answer. How long had this been happening? Did I know who had access to my information? Had I given anyone permission to use my identity? I told her everything about my husband, about his sister, about the mail I'd been hiding, about the bank account, about the signatures that weren't mine. She listened without interrupting. She made notes on a legal pad. She nodded in places. And then she said something that broke me. She leaned forward, her elbows on her desk, and said, "Honey, how did you not know?" I couldn't answer her. I just sat there, staring at the papers on her desk, feeling like the stupidest woman alive. She didn't mean it cruelly. I know that now. But in that moment, I saw myself the way she saw me. Small. Stupid. A woman who'd let herself be erased. A woman who'd been so desperate to be loved, to be a good wife, to keep her family together, that she'd handed over the keys to her own destruction. Carol gave me a folder full of information. Instructions on how to file a fraud report, numbers for credit bureaus, a pamphlet about financial abuse that had a picture of a sad-looking woman on the cover sitting at a kitchen table with bills spread around her. That could have been me. That was me. I walked out of that bank and sat in my car in the parking lot for 2 hours. I didn't cry. I couldn't. I just sat there staring at nothing, feeling like my entire body had been hollowed out. My hands were shaking. My chest felt tight. I kept thinking about that coffee can of buttons, about how I'd saved all those little pieces, thinking they mattered, thinking I was building something. But what had I been building? A life? Or just the appearance of one? A performance of domesticity while everything underneath was rotting away. When I finally came home, I walked past the framed picture of Jesus in the hallway and felt nothing. No comfort, no faith, just emptiness. I went into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of sweet tea. I sat down at the table, and I stared at the wall until the light outside turned gold, then gray, then black. My husband came home. He asked what was for dinner. I told him I hadn't cooked. He looked annoyed. His sister came over. She let herself in without knocking. That was normal now. She had a key. When had I given her a key? I couldn't remember. Maybe I hadn't. Maybe she'd just made one. They ordered pizza, they ate it in the living room, watching a basketball game, laughing at something one of the players did. I stayed in the kitchen. I stared at that coffee can of buttons. And I thought about how easy it is to lose yourself, how it happens so gradually that you don't notice until you're already gone. The manager from the bank called me the next day. Carol, she gave me the name of a legal aid office. She told me to go there, to ask for help. She said they specialized in cases like mine, cases of financial abuse, identity theft by intimate partners. She said they could help me understand my options. She said she'd seen cases like mine before. Too many of them. I almost didn't go. I almost threw the number away and pretended none of it had happened. It would have been easier. Easier to pretend. Easier to forgive. Easier to keep being the woman I'd always been, the woman who made peace, who kept quiet, who sacrificed herself so everyone else could be comfortable. But something in me, some small part that hadn't been completely erased yet, made me go. That's where I met Patricia. She was 56, gray hair pulled back in a bun, glasses on a chain around her neck. She was wearing a purple cardigan despite the heat, and sensible shoes, the kind nurses wear. She was sitting in the waiting room when I walked in. And she looked at me like she knew exactly why I was there, like she could see the whole story written on my face. We didn't speak at first. We just sat there, two women waiting for our names to be called, in a room with fluorescent lights and worn carpet, and a receptionist behind plexiglass who looked like she'd seen everything and was surprised by nothing. But when the receptionist told me it would be another hour, that they were running behind, that I could reschedule if I needed to, Patricia leaned over and said, "First time?" I nodded. She said, "Me too. Well, not anymore. But I remember." We started talking. She told me her son had done the same thing to her. Stolen her identity, ruined her credit, forged her name on loans he never intended to pay. He'd done it for years before she found out. Used her name to buy cars, rent apartments, open credit cards. He'd stolen over $100,000 from her own son, the baby she'd carried and raised and loved unconditionally. She'd spent 3 years fighting to get her life back, 3 years of lawyers and court dates and phone calls to credit bureaus, 3 years of being questioned and doubted and blamed. People asked her how she didn't know. They asked her what kind of mother doesn't notice her son stealing from her. They asked her if she'd enabled him, if she'd been too soft, too trusting, too stupid. She didn't sugarcoat it. She didn't tell me it would be easy, but she told me it was possible. And she told me the most important thing anyone had ever told me. She leaned close, so close I could smell her perfume, something floral and old-fashioned. And she said, "You're not crazy, and you're not alone." I cried then, right there in the waiting room. I cried so hard I thought I'd break apart. All the tears I'd been holding back for weeks, maybe months, maybe years, came pouring out. I cried for the woman I'd been, for the woman I'd thought I was becoming, for all the small ways I'd let myself disappear. Patricia handed me a tissue. She put her hand on my shoulder. She didn't say anything else. She didn't have to. When I finally got called in, she gave me her number. She told me to call her if I needed anything. I put it in my phone. I didn't think I'd use it, but I did. 2 days later, when I found another piece of mail, another account I didn't recognize, when I was sitting in my car crying so hard I couldn't catch my breath, I called her. She answered on the second ring. I can't do this, I told her. It's too much. There's too much. I can't fix this. You don't have to fix it alone, she said. That's what I'm trying to tell you. You don't have to do this by yourself. She told me about a man, a forensic accountant who specialized in financial abuse. His name was Mr. Brennan. She said he was expensive, but he took payments. She said he'd helped her. She said he could help me too. She said he understood these cases, that he'd testified in court dozens of times, that he knew how to trace the money, how to prove fraud, how to build a case that couldn't be dismissed. I called him that same day. Mr. Brennan was in his 60s, calm, professional. He had an office in a building in Midtown, one of those older buildings with marble lobbies and slow elevators. His office was small but tidy, with filing cabinets lining the walls and a desk covered in neat stacks of papers. He didn't waste time on sympathy. He just asked me questions. What did I have? What could I prove? Did I have access to bank statements, to documents, to anything with my husband's handwriting? I told him about the drawer, about the mail I'd been saving. He told me to bring it all to his office. I did. The next day, I brought 3 folders stuffed with statements and notices and bills. He spent 3 hours going through it. He made copies of everything. He made notes. He asked me questions about my husband, about his sister, about their family. He asked if I'd ever signed a power of attorney. I said no. He asked if I'd ever given them permission to use my identity. I said no. And then he looked up at me and said, "This is worse than you think." He found accounts I didn't know existed. He found forged documents that wouldn't hold up in court, signatures that were clearly fake if you knew what to look for. He found loans, credit cards, payment plans, contracts, all with my name signed in handwriting that looked like mine, but wasn't quite right. He built me a timeline, showed me when it started, how it escalated. The first instance was from 3 years ago. 3 years. It had been happening for 3 years, and I hadn't known. He estimated the total damage at over $70,000. $70,000. In my name. Debt I'd never agreed to. For things I'd never seen. I couldn't breathe. I actually couldn't breathe. "Mister." Brennan got me a glass of water. He waited while I drank it. And then he said, "I know this is overwhelming, but I need you to understand something. This is not your fault. You didn't do this. Someone you trusted betrayed you. That's not on you. That's on them." I asked him what I could do. He said I had options. I could file a police report. I could dispute the charges with the credit bureaus. I could try to prove fraud. But he was honest with me. He said it would take years. He said it would cost money I didn't have. He said my husband and his sister would lie, that his family would protect him, that I'd be fighting alone, that the legal system wasn't set up to protect victims of financial abuse, especially when the abuser was a family member. That I'd be asked again and again why I didn't know, why I didn't stop it, why I gave him access in the first place. I asked him if it was worth it. He looked at me for a long time. And then he said, "That depends on what you want. Do you want justice, or do you want your life back?" I didn't have an answer yet. That night, I went home. My husband was there. His sister was there. They were in the living room, laughing about something on TV. They looked so normal, so relaxed, like they hadn't just stolen my entire future, like this was just another Tuesday evening in a normal house with normal people living normal lives. I didn't say anything. I just went upstairs. I lay down on the bed. I stared at the ceiling. The fan spun above me, and I made a decision. I wasn't going to keep pretending. I wasn't going to keep forgiving. I wasn't going to keep sacrificing myself for people who saw me as nothing more than a name they could use, a credit score they could exploit, a doormat they could wipe their feet on. I was going to fight, but I was going to do it my way, quietly, carefully. I was going to wait until I had everything I needed, and then I was going to confront him. Not with tears, not with begging, but with the truth, with evidence, with proof he couldn't deny. It took me 2 more weeks to get ready. Mr. Brennan gave me copies of everything he'd found. I made my own copies. I put them in a folder. I put the folder in my car, hidden under the spare tire in the trunk where I knew nobody would look. I waited for the right moment. It came on a Tuesday. His sister wasn't there. It was just him and me. I poured myself a glass of sweet tea. I sat down at the kitchen table. I put the folder in front of me, and I waited. When he came home, I didn't say anything. I just pointed at the folder. He opened it. He went pale. The color literally drained from his face. He tried to close it. I told him to keep looking. He did. Page after page, his face went from pale to red. And then he started lying. He said it wasn't what it looked like. He said he'd been trying to help. He said he'd been building our credit. He said I didn't understand. He said his sister had needed help, and he'd wanted to be there for her. He said family helps family. He said I was ungrateful. He said he'd done it all for us, for our future. I let him talk. I let him spin his story. I watched him perform. And then I said the thing I'd never said before. I said no. I said no out loud, and I meant it. The word felt strange in my mouth. Heavy. Powerful. Final. I told him I knew everything. I told him I had proof. I told him I'd talked to a forensic accountant. I told him I knew about the forgeries, the fake signatures, the loans, the credit cards, all of it. I told him I wasn't forgiving him this time. I told him to leave. He didn't leave right away. He tried to argue. He tried to guilt me. He said I was tearing the family apart. He said I was being selfish. He said I'd regret this. His voice got louder. He stood up. He leaned over me. For a moment, I thought he might hit me. But I didn't flinch. I stayed calm. I repeated myself. I told him to leave. Finally, he did. He grabbed his keys. He grabbed his phone. He slammed the door so hard, the picture of Jesus rattled on the wall. I sat there in the silence afterward, my hands shaking, my heart pounding, feeling like I'd just survived something catastrophic. The next day, his mother called. She told me I was making a mistake. That marriage means standing by your man. That I was being cruel. That her son was a good man who'd made a small error in judgment. That I was blowing things out of proportion. That I needed to forgive him and move on. I told her what he'd done. I told her about the $70,000. I told her about the forgeries. She said I was lying. She said her son would never do that. She said I'd always been the problem. That I'd never been good enough for him. That I was cold, selfish, ungrateful. She said I'd trapped him with marriage, and now I was trying to destroy him because I couldn't control him anymore. I hung up. His sister called. She screamed at me. She said I was destroying him. She said I'd pay for this. She said I'd always been jealous of their relationship, that I'd never understood how close they were, that I'd always tried to come between them. She said I was a bitter, vindictive woman who couldn't stand to see him happy. She said she'd make sure everyone knew what kind of person I really was. I blocked her number. His brother spread rumors, told people I was crazy, that I'd made it all up, that I was trying to take everything from a good man who'd done nothing wrong. He told people I'd been cheating, that I'd been stealing, that I was an alcoholic, a drug addict, mentally unstable. He created an entire fictional version of me and spread it through our community like wildfire. I lost every single one of them. His entire family turned on me, and some of mine did too. People I thought I could trust. People who told me to forgive him, to give him another chance, to think about what I was throwing away. My aunt called. My cousin called. Even one of my old friends from college called, saying she'd heard about what was happening and she thought I was being too harsh. That everyone makes mistakes. that marriage is hard and requires forgiveness. But here's what I learned. And this is the part I need you to understand. It wasn't just my husband. It was everyone around him who made excuses, who told me to forgive, who blamed me for his choices. They were his protection. They made it possible. They were what people call flying monkeys, enablers, people who do the dirty work for the abuser, who gaslight the victim, who make you feel like you're the one who's wrong. And until I understood that, I kept going back. I kept believing that if I just tried harder, if I could just make them see the evidence, the family would see the truth. But they didn't want to see it. They wanted me to disappear, to be quiet, to keep making excuses for him so they didn't have to face what he really was. Because if they admitted he was capable of this, they'd have to admit they'd been complicit. They'd have to admit they'd watched it happen and said nothing. They'd have to take responsibility. Patricia called me every day during that time. She checked on me. She reminded me I wasn't alone. She introduced me to other women. Women who'd survived what I was surviving. Women whose husbands had stolen from them. Women whose children had forged their names. Women whose siblings had ruined their credit. Women whose parents had taken out loans in their names when they were still minors. We started meeting once a week at a community center in Bed-Stuy, in a room with folding chairs and fluorescent lights and a coffee maker that only worked sometimes. We sat in a circle. We told our stories. We cried. We laughed. We became each other's family. The family we should have had all along. The family that believed us, that saw us, that didn't ask us to make ourselves smaller so they could feel bigger. That was my justice. Not a courtroom, not an apology, not even an admission of guilt. My justice was knowing I wasn't alone. It was finding people who believed me, who saw me, who didn't ask me to forgive what couldn't be forgiven. It was saying no and meaning it. Every single time someone asked me for something I didn't want to give, every time someone tried to guilt me into silence, every time someone told me I was being too harsh, I said no. I refused to shrink. I refused to disappear. And I started planning my escape. I couldn't stay in Brooklyn. Not in that row house. Not in that neighborhood where everyone knew me as his wife. Where people crossed the street to avoid me. Where I could feel their judgment like a weight on my chest. Where I'd see his sister's car parked on the street and feel my stomach drop. Where his mother lived 6 blocks away and I'd see her at the grocery store and she'd look right through me like I didn't exist. I started looking south. Somewhere warm. Somewhere my bones wouldn't ache in winter. I wanted sun. I wanted heat that felt like life instead of exhaustion. I wanted to be somewhere nobody knew my name. Somewhere I could rebuild without the weight of their judgment pressing down on me every single day. I sold what I could. The furniture we'd bought together, the dishes, the linens. I kept only what was mine. What had been mine before the marriage. What I'd brought into that house when I still believed in forever. I saved what I had left. I opened a new bank account at a different bank, one he'd never been to. I closed the old account. I changed my direct deposit. I started putting money aside every week. Not much, but enough. I packed my tomatoes in pots. I couldn't leave them behind. They were the only things I'd grown that no one had taken from me. I packed my coffee can of buttons. I packed my grandmother's pearls, the ones I'd gotten back from that canvas tote bag, the ones that meant something again now. I packed my mother's gold bracelet. I packed the forest green dress I wore when I still thought I was building something real. And one day, I got in my car and I drove. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I didn't leave a forwarding address. I just left. The Lincoln Navigator in burgundy red that I sometimes imagined myself driving, that wasn't my car. That was his dream, or his sister's, or someone else's idea of success. My car was a 10-year-old sedan with a dent in the bumper and a check engine light that had been on for 2 years. But it was mine, truly mine. I'd bought it before we got married with money I'd saved from my first job, and it got me out. I drove south, through New Jersey, through Delaware, through Maryland, through Virginia. I stopped when I got tired. I slept in cheap motels with thin walls and scratchy sheets. I ate fast food. I listened to the radio. Old songs I hadn't heard in years. Songs that reminded me of who I used to be before I became his wife. Before I became small. And for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. I ended up in a small town in North Carolina, near the coast, warm, quiet, a place where nobody knew my name, the kind of town where people still said hello on the street, where the pace was slower, where I could disappear in a good way, not the way I'd been disappearing in Brooklyn, erasing myself to make room for everyone else, but disappearing in the sense of starting over, of becoming someone new. I rented a studio apartment, nothing fancy. Just a single room with a tiny kitchen and a bathroom with a shower that only gave hot water in the mornings. But it was mine. No one else had a key. No one else could walk in unannounced. No one else had a claim to it. I got a job at a bookstore. It paid less than my old job, but it was peaceful. I spent my days surrounded by books, helping customers find what they needed, organizing shelves, making coffee in the little cafe area. My boss was a woman in her 60s who'd run the store for 30 years. She didn't ask a lot of questions. She just gave me space to be. I planted tomatoes in pots on my balcony. They grew better here than they ever had in Brooklyn. Maybe it was the sun. Maybe it was the salt air. Maybe it was just that they were finally truly mine. No one came and took the tomatoes before they were ripe. No one questioned why I was growing them. They were just mine. I started over. It wasn't easy. There were nights I cried myself to sleep. There were days I wanted to call him, to call his mother, to call someone from that old life and ask if they missed me, if they regretted what they'd done, if they ever thought about me at all. But I didn't. I stayed quiet. I stayed gone. Patricia still calls me, once a week, every Sunday morning. We talk about everything, about healing, about moving forward, about building a life that belongs to us. She tells me I'm doing good, that I'm brave. I don't always believe her, but I'm trying. I've been here 6 months now, and I'm starting to feel like myself again, not the self I was before. That woman is gone. She disappeared somewhere between the bank and the legal aid office, and the moment I said no and meant it. But a new self, stronger, clearer, someone who knows what no means, someone who won't let anyone take from her again. I still have the coffee can of buttons. I keep it on a shelf in my kitchen. I look at it sometimes and remember what it used to mean. How I thought saving small things meant I was careful. Now I know it means something different. It means I keep what matters, and I let go of what doesn't. My husband? He's still in Brooklyn. Last I heard, he's with someone new, someone younger. Patricia told me she still has friends in the old neighborhood who keep her updated. I wonder sometimes if he's doing the same thing to her. If she's signed things she shouldn't have. If she's given him access to her accounts. If she's lying awake at night wondering why she feels so empty. I hope not. But I can't save her. I couldn't even save myself. Not until I was ready. His sister? I don't know. I don't care. She made her choice. They all did. And I made mine. I learned something in all of this. Something I want you to understand if you're listening to this and recognizing yourself in my story. Abuse doesn't always look like violence. It doesn't always leave bruises you can see. Sometimes it's financial, sometimes it's legal. Sometimes it's someone forging your name and stealing your future while smiling at you across the dinner table. Since 2011, violence against seniors is a crime in Mexico. But here, financial abuse is still something people excuse as a family matter. Something private, something you're supposed to handle quietly. A 2012 study revealed that 1 in 4 nursing home residents suffered physical abuse. But how many more suffer theft, forgery, control that never gets reported because it's family? Because we're taught that family comes first, that blood is thicker than water, that forgiveness is always the answer. It's not. Sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes the answer is leaving. Sometimes the answer is building a new family with people who see you, who believe you, who don't ask you to make yourself smaller so they can feel bigger. I'm 31 years old. I survived. And I'm telling you now, if someone in your family is taking from you, forging your name, stealing your future, you don't owe them forgiveness. You owe yourself the truth. You owe yourself protection. You owe yourself a life where you're not constantly disappearing to make room for everyone else. So here's what I want to know. Where are you listening to this from? Are you in your kitchen at midnight, pouring sweet tea, feeling that hum of dread you can't name? Are you hiding mail in a drawer? Are you making excuses for someone who's taking everything you have? Are you shrinking yourself to make them comfortable? What would you have done? Would you have left sooner? Would you have fought harder? Would you have forgiven? If this story resonated with you, if it made you feel something, if it helped you see your own life more clearly, do me a favor, leave a comment. Tell me where you're from. Tell me what you would have done. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share it with them. Subscribe if you want more stories like this. Stories about survival, about rebuilding, about women who refuse to disappear, because we're still here, and we're not going anywhere.